Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again on the Kestrel Country Podcast. We really appreciate the support. Those of you listening, liking, sharing, subscribing to the podcast. We really appreciate it and are super excited about the start of this podcast and the reception we've had already. We've got some great interviews already recorded, some more in the works, but we'd also love your feedback. Comment, let us know what you would like to learn more about in this area that we live. We're excited about learning more and sharing more with you. If you have any ideas, folks you'd love to hear on the podcast, share those as well. So thank you so much again, and let's get into it. Hello and welcome. This is the Kestrel Country Podcast, where we discuss the people, places, and events all around Kestrel Country. Hey everybody, I'm your host, Mike Church, and I'm joined here once again by my co-host and lovely wife, Catherine.
Hello, hello.
And today we've got a great interview, really excited. We got to talk to Dulce Kersting-Lark with the Latah County Historical Society. Had a fun conversation with her. But before we get into that interview, we wanted to talk about some upcoming events. And coming up before we know it is Valentine's Day.
Yes, so here's the rundown of what we found being done specifically for Valentine's Day in the area. Now, if we missed something, let us know and we'll try to highlight it again later. But cookie decorating by Candy's Cookies is happening twice before Valentine's Day, nice. February 1st and February 8th.
Where's that?
February 1st at the Grange Building, Latah County Fairgrounds, 1 to 4. So look that up if you're interested in cookie decorating, or maybe your kids are.
Cool.
So that's a fun event before Valentine's Day. And then on Valentine's Day, if you are artistic, or even if you're not, you could try Heritage Arts Academy Wine and Paint Night at the Arts Room in the 1912 Center, 7 to 9 p.m. Dessert, wine, and you'll be making a copy of Water Lilies by Monet.
Oh, nice.
Really fun. If you wanted an overnight in town, Best Western is doing a package deal. It includes a credit to Seasons. They do have a his and hers Valentine's dinner happening at Seasons that you can do. And that's a 2-night option, 14th and 15th, it looks like.
Nice. Well, speaking of dinner,
what
are some special dinner options? Obviously, there's tons of, one of the great things we love about living here are all of the amazing options for restaurants. So, but we found a few, right, that have some kind of specific Valentine's events or menus. Yeah. So let's hear about those.
So Lodgepole is doing one. It didn't say what is on the Valentine's Day menu. They said finishing touches are being placed.
Nice. It'll be awesome, though,
I'm sure it will be awesome. But it also said that they only have a few spots left, so you'll want to make sure and call them to get your reservation there. Mary Sellers, Jump into Pullman, is doing a Valentine's Winemaker's Dinner, and they're doing that for 2 nights, so you can do it on the 14th or the 15th. Our very own Chris at Kestrel is going on the 15th, so if you want to see him.
And that'll be at the winery?
That's at the winery.
Over in Pullman?
Yep.
That'll be cool.
And they had crispy cheese curd risotto and prawns listed as a starter.
Nice.
Sounded good. Over in Pullman as well, the Black Cypress, one of our favorites, was doing a 5-course tasting menu. There's running from the 14th through the 16th.
Okay.
Halibut, handmade pasta. Sounds delicious.
Nice. And we've done their one of their prefix menus for Valentine's Day before. Is awesome.
It was really fun. Especially they bring out these little surprise bites, and those are fun. In Deary, Pie Safe, also a delicious place to go. We have never done the Valentine's thing or dinner out there, but they have a 5-course menu, and cream of leek soup was listed on there, and I love leeks, so that sounds delicious. Those were the ones that we found specifically listed for Valentine's Day, but of course there's lots of great options that you could do in town too.
Yeah, I'm sure that, and there probably will be more that are coming out with their special Valentine's menus. But coming from a serial procrastinator, definitely be sure to get your reservations in early. I've often found myself trying to make last minute reservations not going so well. But yeah, one of my favorites is Tapped. Keep an eye out for them, what they might be doing. Always a great option.
We have the new wine bar in town, Vine.
Yeah, Vine.
So Vine, I don't know if they're doing anything for Valentine's Day, but it'd probably be a fun thing to hit.
Nectar, always good options. Yeah, just really, really fun to have so many great options in town. So, those are some good options for Valentine's Day. And let's get into the interview with Dulce. So, we're really excited. She came in and recorded this with us earlier this week. We talked about the founding of the Latah County Historical Society itself,
as well as Moscow. And she has just a lot of knowledge to share. So we were excited to learn from her and be able to share that with you all.
Yeah, barely scratched the surface. I'm sure we'll have her on again. We'll talk a lot more because we certainly love history, want to learn and talk more about the history of our area. But let's get into the podcast with Dulce. Yeah, so thanks so much for joining us, Dulce. We're really excited to have you on, and we love history. That's one of the things I love about real estate.
I love to hear that.
It's always every piece of property. I tell people, to a lesser extent, new construction, but even there, the land has so much history around here. So we're excited to learn more about it and dig more into this area. So thanks for joining us.
Oh gosh, thank you for the invitation. And I really appreciate that you all are interested in it. I will say one of our biggest interest groups, some of the most frequent visitors to our research office are people looking for information about their homes.
Oh, wow.
In Moscow in particular, especially those who live in kind of the Fort Russell area, or they live on Elman Street, or in the part that I guess some people know is Swedetown.
Yes. So this is my history.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Good. My husband and I live on 8th Street, and so we're in Swedetown too. And I love that neighborhood because it's so mixed. You can tell how the blocks developed in that neighborhood because you've still got the 19th century farmhouse on one corner, and then you've got some 30s kind of craftsman, and then you've got the post-war, which is what my husband and I have, a 1948 home, which is clearly built for a couple right after the war.
Right.
And then you've got even newer, 70s and 80s homes. And I adore how mixed that neighborhood is. It really attracts a lot of different types of families, and it's a fun place to live.
Well, and 7th and 8th Street, too, they're just fun streets. You drive down them because they're not your normal, I'm going to take this to get across town. But they're quiet and they're cozy, and the trees are all grown up. There's something so appealing about those neighborhoods.
It's a great neighborhood to walk dogs in.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Well, yeah, one of the things I'm kind of skipping ahead, I guess, but is you mentioned the old farmhouses and then the other homes building up around them. Is the hand-drawn map that's fairly common around town.
The bird's eye view.
Places.
Yeah. Yep.
Where there's a handful of homes that I've sold over the years that you can see them and find them in there and see wow, this was the edge of town. Right. This was a farm. And it's amazing to see how it's changed so much.
Yeah. There are places in town that now, they're very much in the city limits, but they were considered country homes at the time. And, kind of the famous example of that is the Scatabo family that built the Scatabo block, which is where New St. Andrews is housed now. They would live in the upstairs of that building in the wintertime because their home was too far out in the country to have to come in every day. And now that home is within Moscow city limits.
Wow.
So just kind of an interesting example of how people adapted over time. But certainly the community has grown up a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
We did a really fun event this past summer with Maynard Fosberg, who owns that kind of green space property at the corner of D and Mountain View. So across from the skate park and the middle school, and he's still got horses on pasture there. And it's this great little chunk of old-time Moscow. And when he and his wife bought that property in the 50s, it was so far out of town that they couldn't get milk delivered there.
Oh, my word.
And now, obviously, it's right across from the skate park. Yes. So that tells you
well, and as a
just
kid,
how urban it is.
We would walk over there because our home was close to what is now the water park. It wasn't built until I was, later elementary. But we would walk over there. That's where the horses were. You could go see them, right there. So it's too fun. Well, we'll back up a little bit. Yeah. And so we've got Dulce on here today.
We just really got into it.
We just jumped in.
It's hard. We get
We're too
excited.
But she runs the Latah Historical Society here in Moscow. And so we wanted to get a little bit of history about our town and, of course, what you do at the Latah Historical Society.
Of course. Our organization traces its roots back to the Latah County Pioneer Association, which was a pre-turn of the century group. It was a little bit like a Daughters of the American Revolution sort of group. You had to prove your pioneer lineage to be members of it, and we have the old paperwork people would fill out to know what their familial connection was to the pioneers.
Wow.
And we also are kind of a descendant group of the Moscow Historical Club, which was a women's group in town that kind of was philanthropically minded, but also had an interest in history. So those two organizations came together in the 1960s when the McConnell Mansion was donated to Latah County. The final private owner of that home was Dr. Frederick Church. He was a University of Idaho professor, and he didn't have any heirs, and he himself was a history professor, very interested in history, and had for a long time operated that home as a boarding house for faculty that had just moved to town, or for upper level students or graduate students, and would have lectures there and recitals and conversation groups. And it was really just kind of like this hub in town. So when he passed away in the late 60s, without anyone to take over the home, he gifted it to Latah County to be a museum and a meeting space.
Oh, wow.
The county, very wisely, I think, said, we aren't really in the business of running a museum. Who might be able to manage this for us? And so they connected with these two groups that kind of came together to form. Then it was called the Latah County Pioneer Museum Association. I mean, it was a very long name. We still have a long name, but it's been shortened and condensed in ways. Yeah. So we were officially incorporated in 1968. So we've been around for 50 years or more. Doing preservation work. We've got archives, which are really fabulous. We've got a great historic photo collection, more and more of which is available online.
You do. That one. We've used that a lot.
Yeah,
you guys
the photo collection's
great.
Awesome. And my coworker, Zach Winnick, who is our museum curator, is really into digitization. It's kind of his jam. So he's done a great job of putting a lot of content on our Google Arts and Culture site. So if you just go to Google Arts and Culture and put in Latah County Historical Society, you'll find, I think we're close to 2,000 photos of historic Moscow up right now, which are awesome, and they're pretty easily searchable. But we also have an object collection that people don't get to see very often. Our entire basement of our office building is filled with historic objects. Really? All sorts of stuff, yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
And we have a pretty extensive historic costume collection, historic clothing.
Is that all stored in basement of your office?
Upstairs is my office plus all the clothing storage. On the main level is our research office plus our archival storage and our photos. And then in the basement is our object collection.
Oh, that's really fun.
And then, of course, our biggest object is the McConnell Mansion,
right.
Which we operate for Latah County. So it's a great partnership between local government and a nonprofit organization. We're able to kind of efficiently run this without it being a big burden on Latah County, but also sharing some responsibility for a small nonprofit.
So the county still they own the building, the McConnell Mansion.
They own the McConnell Mansion.
And you guys operate it.
Correct.
Okay.
For, I think we pay like $1 a year on a lease or something very, very nominal.
Yes.
Exactly. But then we, the Historical Society nonprofit group then takes care of the maintenance on the building, like security system and water and electrical, which in a house with single pane windows, an 1886 home, it's expensive to heat. And we aren't like even in there all the time. And lawn care and those sorts of things. So like I said, I think it's such a great example of this public-private partnership that is really kind of it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn because that's where I work, but we're really kind of a shining example in the state of Idaho. Very few other counties have the sort of resources devoted to historic preservation as Latah County. Wow. Which I think makes it such an attractive place to be. And certainly historic tourism, there's all sorts of data out there to show that people want to live and visit places that have stories.
Well, they want to know what happened,
Yeah, and they, especially, I think people our generation are really interested in authenticity, and you can't manufacture authenticity. And so really embracing the historic downtown of Moscow, embracing our historic homes, and even the general history in Latah County makes it a much more interesting place to visit and certainly to live. I'm not from here, and I moved here for a job, and I was like, oh, I'll be here for 2 to 3 years.
I feel
and
like
that was
a lot
7
of people
years
say
ago.
that.
Yeah. Moscow gets its hooks in you.
It's true.
It's a great place.
Yeah, I'll be here for a short term. No.
Yeah,
Well,
3-4 decades. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
So, you talked a little bit about all the stuff you guys are doing. How do you fund all that? Is your nonprofit, is it all donation driven?
Yeah, so we are in large part individually, we get individual donations. So I will say that besides being the primary caretaker of the McConnell Mansion, as in when we needed a new roof last year, the county really stepped up and made sure that that project happened, and we were able to get funding also from the city and from some state agencies to kind of have a collaborative effort in that. But Latah County also pays for our staff, so that's the huge investment that Latah
really?
County
Gotcha.
makes. So I'm actually a county employee, which is amazing.
Wow.
Because those silly things like health insurance and retirement and things, you get those things, which are awesome. So by underwriting the staff of our organization, Latah County enables us to then work for the nonprofit organization, which does all the fundraising for the actual activities.
Okay.
Got it.
So that's kind of the investment. The county pays for the people time, and then the people do all the fundraising for the activities and for the ongoing maintenance of the space, for fielding research requests, all that sort of stuff. So again, it's that public-private partnership that makes it really, really work.
Yeah. Well, that is impressive that Latah County is,
Right.
they're really putting themselves behind it and supporting it. That probably is very unique.
It is. There are a few other counties in Idaho that underwrite in different ways. Like maybe they'll give a set amount of funds to the local historical group. And I will say that the city of Moscow also provides us with a little bit of funding each year to serve as kind of the city historian, so we can assist if there's a historic records request, or we oftentimes will get requests from like Parks and Rec. Do you have historic photos of these parks? And we're really happy to help with those things. So we get a little bit of support from the city of Moscow, but primarily it is Latah County. And then we many, many years ago had some really visionary leaders who created an endowment for us. So we have the Latah County Historic Foundation, and that foundation has really been wisely invested over time. And so we draw about a third of our operating budget every year just from the dividends that we draw from those investments.
Oh, great.
So we are in a really fortunate position that we don't have to rely on grants that often. It's really like special projects will be grant funded, but our overall general operating budget, we can count on our individual donors, which are huge. That's the bulk of our donations each year come from people who just believe in the cause and they donate $100 or more or less. I mean, it's really amazing to see how many people believe in the work and they value it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It is.
Well, so you said you're not from here.
I'm not.
Where are you from?
I am from another I state. I'm from Iowa.
Okay. The other, yeah.
The other one that gets
gets
confused.
That gets confused often.
Yeah.
Yes, out here people often go, "Oh, you're from Ohio," and I said, "No, we're very different from Ohio."
Yeah.
I mean, if you just
Michigan.
got dropped there, maybe you wouldn't tell, but they're very different.
Yeah.
Yes.
So coming into this area and then serving in the role you are, what you said, I agree with you that people really want a place with stories. So are there any really unique or stories that stand out to you that you've learned since joining Latah County Historical Society that you want to share?
So what comes to mind is, so I'm actually a trained historian. That's what I went to school to do, was to be a historian. But I always knew I wanted to be outside of academia. So museums, historical societies, archives, those were always very attractive places to me. So I'm also a Western historian. My master's thesis was on open range era cowboys. I just love the American West. It's very romanticized to me. Growing up as a kid in the Midwest, I thought, to live among mountains and
Same here. I grew up in
cattle.
Michigan,
Yeah,
so
right?
I totally get it.
Midwest kids. I mean, and I meet a lot of Midwesterners out here, and I think people get out here and the people are equally as friendly, but the weather is so much better, and you're like, I'm never leaving.
And the scenery. I mean,
There's no mosquitoes.
And there's mountains.
No mosquitoes.
There's mountains, yeah.
Yeah, and there's mountains. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So what has really struck me, and I think left me so enchanted about Latah County, is that it is a real microcosm of the American West. I think when you look at what is a relatively small county. I mean, truthfully, compared to Idaho County, we're minuscule. But we have mining history here. We have timber industry here. We had a company town. Yeah. We have agricultural history. We've got railroads. There was a period where cattle were really an important part of the economy. There's just so much history here. A land grant institution. So much of what made the American West, you can find evidence of in Latah County. And that's what I love about it so much. It's wonderfully diverse. And I just love that if you were to drive from Potlatch down to Julietta, you get such a broad array of scenery. It's amazing. In an hour, you can go from one of the largest stands of white pine timber in the continental U.S. down to this rugged canyon land. It really just is so endearing to me. And so I think that's what I've really come to appreciate the most about being here, is it's got a really diverse story to tell.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of which, can you give us the rundown on how Moscow got founded?
Yeah. So there were folks in the area. I mean, we should, of course, acknowledge that the Nez Perce and Coeur d'Alene people were here for time immemorial, and the Palouse people, and this was a major thoroughfare, really. The Nez Perce Trail crisscrossed Latah County, and there were people traveling from the Clearwater and Snake Rivers up to Spokane Falls to do trading. So there have been people here for a very, very, very long time. But the first kind of non-native people were arriving in the 1830s and 40s. They were doing a minimal amount of trapping. It was really never a big trapping area, and petered out pretty quickly. Then in the 1860s, late 1860s, there was a little bit of mining that happened in the Hoodoo district, way up towards Beauville, Clarkia area. But again, that didn't last terribly long. So the first real permanent settlement doesn't happen until the 1870s. In the grand scheme of American history, that's very late, right?
It's really late,
I mean,
yes.
If you grew up in Connecticut, you'd think like, oh, great, 1870, yesterday, whatever. But this area was back immigrated in large part. So there were a lot of people who actually were all the way to the Pacific before they came back here.
My family was that way. They were their travel took them to San Francisco, then, and then up to Moscow eventually.
Yeah, and one of the very famous names in Moscow is McConnell, the McConnell Building, the McConnell Mansion. William McConnell, he was in the Willamette Valley before he was here. And so there were quite a few families and groups of settlers that got all the way to the coast and realized either it wasn't what they were looking for, or they heard tell of this other land. I mean, I can't imagine being a pioneer during those times. It was kind of like, I hear a rumor that things might be good 500 miles from here. I guess I'll take off.
And it's not just catch a flight.
No.
It is. Oh my goodness. Yes.
Pack up, kids. We're going.
And we might be in the covered wagon. It's crazy.
It is. It really gives you an appreciation for how hardy those people were, and how much faith they placed in.
And how much they valued it.
Yeah, exactly. So people arrived here in the mid to late 1870s. They started settling the area, and the first thought, and here kind of in the Paradise Valley area, which is where Moscow ends up being, and also down towards Genesee, that's where the first groups of people are. And at first they thought they were going to ranch because there was such good grassland for animals, hogs, and cattle. But pretty quickly they realized that the soil was so fertile that it was going to be more lucrative to grow. And also there's not a lot of surface water around here, so it's just kind of hard to have big herds of animals. So late 1870s, you're starting to get kind of a conglomerate of people here in the Moscow area. And first name, very famously, was Hog Heaven.
Right.
That's the trivia question. You got to know if you come.
Yep, if you're here.
And in part because the camas fields in this area were so rich that the hogs really loved rooting around in it. So Hog Heaven for a very short time. And the story is the refined ladies who were here didn't like that name. And I don't know if that's true or not, or if they really cared at that time. But anyway, it's not Hog Heaven for very long. The first post office claim is filed in the late 1870s, I think, or very early 1880s. And They put down Paradise Valley as the name, but there was already a Paradise Valley somewhere else in Idaho. So the request came back and said, you're going to have to change your name. You need to have a separate name. And the person who was in charge of the paperwork, Samuel Neff, had grown up in Moscow, Pennsylvania, which is the most likely story for how we ended up with Moscow. It was like, oh, what's another name? Moscow. Moscow will do. So I wish it was a cooler story about how we wanted to take on Moscow, Russia, or somebody said that it meant the city of brotherly love. I was like, that's Philadelphia, isn't it? I was like, I don't think that's true.
But it seems incredibly accurate. When you're in the middle of something like that, you're just, I've got to fill out the paperwork. We've just got to go with something, it just seems so practical.
If you look at the number of communities in Latah County in the first, the latter part of the 19th and early part of the 20th centuries, the idea that Moscow might become the community it is today, maybe it crossed their mind. I kind of doubt it. I mean, there was something like 40 post offices in Latah County at one time. There were so many communities, little ones, that it was like, oh, we just need to get a post office here. Okay, let's get one together, and Moscow will do. And I don't think they were thinking, and what will people 150 years from now be thinking about this name?
No.
So.
Yeah, as any of them could have turned, they probably were thinking any of those could have turned into the county seat or whatever.
Right.
It was
Most definitely.
Joel, Cornwall, all these little towns that are basically gone now.
They're not even wide spots in the road anymore. Yeah.
But at the time we were, Chris Smith and I were up talking to Nels Peterson and about their house, in Cornwall and about that was the name. I never even knew that was Cornwall. And then he kind of realized, well, Moscow's really the place you got to be, and moved in here to Moscow. But yeah, it's fascinating to hear all the stories of these little towns and what used to be there.
Yeah. And the railroad played a huge part in a lot of those communities. A lot of them ended up being spots for stops on the railroad. And when the railroad pulled out, it was kind of like, that's it. We have no more reason to exist. Certainly the better development of our road systems, the better the transportation capabilities between communities, the more likely it was that people, even if they were living in those smaller towns, would commute into Moscow, or even, a lot of communities lost out to places like Troy and Genesee, because you could still get to a place with a little bit bigger commerce base.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating.
So it went pretty fast from being nothing, becoming Moscow, to having the university here.
It did.
Yeah.
Probably 15 years it went from really a log cabin that was both the general store and the post office and the hub of town to having the land-grant institution seated here. It did take off very quickly. Again, it helped when the railroad arrived, which was in the mid-1880s. That really helps boost inflow of people in. And for a time, there was even talk that, Moscow was going to rival Spokane in size. And obviously that didn't pan out. But the university gets seated here, I think. Officially, 1889 is when they decide to site it here, and 1890 is when it opens. I mean, it's kind of incredible to think they built a university and opened it in about 12 months. Things just happen quickly. You got that pioneer spirit.
You do. You just have to get this
done. Not a lot of red tape. Nope. So Latah County, I think, this is another kind of fun, quirky story, is Latah County is the only county that was created by an act of Congress. And that is because before this time, and there's really interesting, and I wish I could remember it off the top of my head. Maybe I can give you the link and you can link it later. But it's this great interactive map that shows how the county boundaries have changed in the state over time. And so at the very beginning in the 1860s and 70s, we were actually part of a county called Latah, Lah-TOH. And we were the southernmost part of that county, with Coeur d'Alene as the county seat. And then county boundaries changed, and we become part of Nez Perce County. And for anybody who has ever driven the grade from the top of the prairie down to Lewiston, it's a little bit scary now. Well, having to do it in a horse and wagon 150 years ago was really alarming for people. But the county seat was Lewiston, so to get a lot of business done was a challenge. So there was a pretty big push up here on the top of the prairie to separate the counties and have Moscow be a county seat for its own space. So there's some political maneuvering that happens, and finally the the Congress actually, through the territorial representatives pressuring in Washington, D.C., passes some legislation to create Latah County as its own separate entity. And President Cleveland signed that in 1888. So Latah County is created in 1888. The university is cited in 1889. Idaho becomes a state in 1890. So this is all happening in territorial era. Yeah. And then 1890 is when the university opens. In 1891, I guess, is its first graduating class. So yeah, I mean, you're right, Mike. It's just like boom, boom, boom. All this stuff is happening.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's crazy.
It is.
It would have been a wild time to live here, I think.
No
I
kidding.
know.
Well, and seeing those old pictures, it's
I just love
it's
it.
amazing. I mean, that's what, if anything, we can encourage people is
Just
look
look
up the
those.
archives, look up that stuff,
Yeah.
and just look at, because it's amazing to see how that landscape's changed. And
But also how it wasn't that long ago. And then
It was not, no.
so you can be in these buildings or outside of these buildings and look at that. And it's just, wow, think of how much it has changed in 100 years.
Yeah, and I've got one of my dear friends lives in a home that was built before the turn of the century, and I just love the idea that like people have continuously been calling this place home and making it work and being part of the community. And, they come home every night to this same home and thinking about the generational changes. Of course, I'm kind of geeky like that, and I love to think about those sorts of things.
Oh, no,
but
I 100% agree.
yeah, I sold a home last year that was the lady who sold it to my buyers. She talked about how the people she bought it from, so it's just not that long ago, it's indirect, but not that long ago, talked about how all the little old ladies would come over and say, hey, this was the first place I ever took a bath. This was the first house around that had running water with a bathtub.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it was just, to think about that, it really was only a couple owners ago.
Yeah.
And just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I think, that initial era in Moscow was full of excitement. And, if you look at the architecture of downtown Moscow, you'll notice, if you take note of when the buildings were built, you will notice that in the mid-1890s, there's kind of a slump. Mm-hmm. So Panic of 1892 is a nationwide financial panic, but it's doubly hard felt here because there was a wheat crop failure.
Oh, wow.
It was too wet to take most of the crop off. And so a lot of farmers that had purchased on credit supplies from places like the McConnell-McGuire store or from Shields and Company, they defaulted. Mm-hmm. And so in turn, those business owners defaulted. So there was quite a bit of bankruptcy in the mid-1890s. And if you stand at 4th and Main Streets at Friendship Square, that's really one of the primo examples of early or late 19th century architecture. All 4 of those buildings at that corner were built between 1890 and 1892, or 1889 and 1891. It's one of those year spans. And it just gives you this sense of how much promise there was. There were these 3-4-story brick buildings. They're gorgeous. And then in the mid-1890s, there's nothing happening. Yeah. And so I really give credit to the people who stuck it out and didn't just say, on to the next town.
Right.
There were people like M.J. Shields who said, I'm committed to this community and I'm going to keep working on it. And I'm really grateful for their endurance, to be sure.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, we could probably have 100 more of these podcasts, and hopefully we will.
And hopefully we will, because there are so many little pockets.
We'll just give a teaser on it. But one thing we definitely wanted to talk about is, what are some upcoming events?
Yeah.
At the both the McConnell Mansion and the Historical Society in general. And how can people get involved? Are there volunteer opportunities needed? I mean, what can...
Thank you for asking. There's always volunteer opportunities. Actually, one of our largest needs all the time is we staff our museum with volunteers. We call them docents, which sounds very fancy, but it's just being kind of a greeter at the space. And you can give tours if you want to, or you can give people a self-guided tour and just answer questions as needed. But we are always looking for more folks to join our docent course. So if that's something that you're interested in, you've got one day a month you'd like to, it's not even a full day, it's an afternoon, 1 to 4 p.m. We're really always looking for more of those folks. Mm-hmm. If you like old stuff, that's a fun place to hang out at the McConnell Mansion. And we just got Wi-Fi. It's a very big deal. It's kind of incongruous with the house, but you got to have the Wi-Fi these days.
You don't see it, so that's fine.
Yeah. But we also have lots of volunteer opportunities in our archives. So if you enjoy processing old pictures or working with old garments or touching old stuff that's not yours that you have to deal with, you can leave it behind, then definitely find us. You can get all of our contact information on our website, which is Latah County Historical Society.org. As far as events go, this year, 2020, is the 100th anniversary of ratification of the 19th Amendment, which is a big deal. Women were granted the right to vote, won the right to vote, whatever sort of verb you want to use. So we have a series of events to commemorate that anniversary. Our first one is actually this coming Tuesday, and it is a program on why women in the West got suffrage so much earlier than women in the East. By 1914, most Western states had granted women suffrage, but most states in the East weren't allowing women to vote until they were forced to in 1920. So we're going to kind of evaluate that, and shout out to Idaho. We've been voting since 1896, so woohoo, which is really awesome. So we've got that program this coming Tuesday, which is at the Kenworthy Theater, 7 p.m., and it's free. That's January 28th. We have a couple other events, one that'll be focused on the story of suffrage in Idaho in March with a couple professors from the University of Idaho. And then in April, we're going to host a panel discussion that is going to be moderated by Representative Carolyn Nilsen-Troy about women in Idaho politics today. So we're going to have representatives of women who have either served in elected office or are currently serving in elected office. So I'm really excited about that series of programs. We do a very fun thing in April called Suds with a Scholar, which is beer in history, which is always good. And that's at the fairgrounds, and your admission gets you entry to the event plus your first beer on the house. And we're really grateful to Hunga Dunga for being our major sponsor on that event. That's
Who's
April
your
11th.
scholar?
Our scholar is Dr. Kathy Aiken. She's professor emeritus from the University of Idaho. She's going to be sharing the story of Dean Permeal French. She was the longtime dean of women at the University of Idaho and very famous for her strict rules. I once had a volunteer share with me that when she was a young co-ed at the university, she was scolded by Dean French for being too recumbent on the lawn. She was not supposed to be laying down on the lawn. Yes, so just a different era, and kind of sharing some fun stories and thinking about how important it was to families at the time to be sending their young daughters off to university somewhere. They wanted assurances that somebody was going to be keeping an eye on them. So Dean French definitely had an eye on them.
Awesome.
Well,
Very
we're running out of time here, I think.
Yeah.
But
Thanks so much.
Dulce, thank you so much.
Oh gosh, thank you for inviting me. I could
it.
talk all day, obviously.
I know.
I'm a chatter.
We would
No, I
love
love
to have
it.
you back on for sure.
Okay,
I mean,
awesome.
yeah, just like we were talking about, every little town too has all these stories.
all the
It's easy for
surrounding
us to
area.
think about Moscow because we live here and we're kind of in it all the time, but it's just really fascinating to hear the stories of what happened in these other towns.
Oh, definitely. And they all represent different stories. I mean, I think it's so interesting we have a true company town in this
Potlatch,
county. But the story of how Troy changed its name from Volmer to Troy is a great story. The story of when Genesee had to move. So where Genesee is today is not the original town site of Genesee.
Oh, man.
So there's lots
the
of
next
great
couple
stories
series
out
right
there.
there.
Lots of teasers. Yeah. That's awesome.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much.
Oh gosh, thank
Thanks
you for
again.
having me.
Thanks for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next week.